everyone. This is Kimberly Brown from the Office of Career Services at Teachers College, Columbia University. We want to thank you today for joining us in for our TC Alumni Career Development webinar featuring Lois Zachary. Today, Lois is an internationally recognized expert on mentoring and has been cited as one of the top 100 minds in leadership today. You've likely seen mention of Dr. Zachary's books or read her quotes in the New York Times, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Inc. magazine, TND, Leadership Excellence, the Chronicle of Higher Education, or other business leadership outlets, leadership news outlets. Her most recently published book, Starting Strong, A Mentoring Fable, which she wrote with her colleague, Lois Fischler, launched this past October. In addition, Dr. Zachary published a collection of poetry and reflection, My Mother Has Finest Eyes. Dr. Zachary received her doctorate in adult and continuing education from Columbia University Teachers College. She holds a Master of Arts degree from Columbia University and Master of Science degree in education from Southern Illinois University. Today, this webinar fast-tracks participants through the process of creating a vibrant and sustainable mentoring culture, beginning with assessing organizational readiness, designing appropriate mentoring opportunities, and providing ongoing support. Participants will learn about the 8 hallmarks of a mentoring culture and the specific processes they need to support all the mentoring that goes on in their organization. We're so excited to have her today, especially because TC has recently launched the pilot mentoring program that we're looking to expand over the next year. So without further ado, thank you so much for being here, Lois Zachary.
Well, thank you, and welcome, everyone. I'm especially glad because it is also, in addition to the launch of your program, it's National Mentoring Month. So it's really timely that we're doing this. And I'm also glad to be here and pleased to be doing this because Teachers College has given me so much. This is a great opportunity to give back, and I hope that it will encourage other alumni to do the same. So over the next hour, we're going to be focusing on how to create a mentoring culture in your organization. We're going to begin by focusing on the definition and some key concepts of mentoring that are essential to creating a sustainable mentoring culture. As you can probably well imagine, I do a lot of speaking to organizations about mentoring. And usually I'm asked to convince people sitting in the audience to buy into mentoring, to motivate them that they ought to be engaged, but certainly that's not the case here. And I'm sure that your belief in the promise and power of mentoring to transform and make an enduring difference in people's lives today is what is inspiring you to be here today. So I wanted to just give you a little overview about what you'll be learning about today. We're going to talk about the importance of creating a mentoring culture, how you set the standard of mentoring excellence in your organization, because a lot of mentoring goes on, but it's not always mentoring excellence. We're going to talk about the concepts of readiness, opportunity, and support, and how all that comes to play. And we're going to look at the hallmarks of a mentoring culture. Donna Markova's words have become my mantra, and I hope they will resonate for you. I choose to risk my significance to live so that that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. So with that, let's just talk a little bit about mentoring excellence. As I mentioned before, not all mentoring is equal. I believe that we need to set a new standard of practice that's going to raise the bar for everyone, something to which everyone can aspire in an organization, one that inspires competence, commitment, confidence, one that's about quality, not the quantity, not the numbers, but really the quality. So I'd like to see that whole focus on how many do we have in our program and how many programs do we have shift to really the quality. So mentoring excellence is about partnership, it's about process, it's about practice, it's about a program. Mentoring excellence is about the kind of relationships we have and the depth of conversations that we have. It's a deeper, more reflective practice, certainly something that's familiar to all of us who are TC grads. So mentoring excellence begins by understanding the concept. So let's take a look at this definition. And let me just say a few words about the definition. This definition really came to the forefront as a result of what we know about how adults learn. For many years, the definition of mentoring was just about a give and a get. But we see here it's much deeper. It reflects what we know about how adults learn. So let me stop for a moment and focus on a few words. One of the words is reciprocal. And we say that mentoring is reciprocal, but sometimes mentors don't really let their mentees in on that. In other words, mentees always want to know what is the mentor getting from the relationship. So if you're a mentor, you're going to want to tell your mentee what you're learning. It might be something as simple as, you know, Mary, in the last session when we were talking together, you gave me some insights about technology that I had never thought about before. And I went back to my work team and shared those. And I want to thank you for that because it's really raised the level of conversation for all of us. So important to say, okay, here's what I'm learning from you. And of course, as a mentor, you want to check in and make sure it's reciprocal. We also talk about learning as a key in mentoring. Mentoring is really focused on learning. We like to say that learning is the purpose, it's the product, and it's the process of mentoring. So that if your relationship is a great relationship but there's no learning going on, then it's not a mentoring relationship. And that brings us to the word relationship. Relationship has to do with trust. It has to do with not only building the relationship, but strengthening the relationship. So you have to get that comfort zone where the mentor and the mentee can agree to a partnership. And we've all been involved in partnerships, so we know what the words mean on a piece of paper, but to be able to make those real in a mentoring relationship takes time. Where they work together collaboratively. So it's not just about one person bringing something to the table and something else, but it's the conversation that takes place that makes the collaborative richer and has that really strength to move it forward, to take it to the next step. So it's not just 1 + 1 = 2, but something greater, 1 + 1 = 3. So it's also focused on mutually defined goals, and that's a process. The process of coming to mutually defined goals, where a mentee may come to mentoring with an idea of what goals they want, but a mentor's role is to help them mutually define them so that the mentor can stand in the mentee's shoes, understand those goals, but may help that mentee realize that the goals that they've put out there are not really going to drive their development, and not really the root cause. Maybe they're working on a symptom or a strategy. So the idea is defining the goals, and here's a key word that's going to develop a mentee's skills, ability, knowledge, and or thinking. So this definition reflects a paradigm shift. And what I mean by that is it used to be that the mentee was a passive learner and would sit at the feet of the master. But you want your mentee to become an active learner. So what that means is that the mentor needs to create a climate, needs to create a space so the mentee feels comfortable enough to ask for what they need. And the mentor's role has shifted. It may be that a mentor has more knowledge and experience, but a mentor is not the authority. The mentor's role is a facilitator, someone who asks questions that takes people to deeper places of insight. And so the learning process then shifts from mentor-directed to self-directed. And then the focus is not just on, we like to use the word knowledge transfer and knowledge acquisition, but we know as TC grads how important critical reflection is. And so to help people sit at the feet of their own experience and learn from it. So very, very important. So there are lots of reasons why mentoring and efforts fail. I just want to highlight a few. We're shifting now from the individual definition to efforts within an organization. And one of the things that I see is the lack of commitment from senior leaders. So while they may say that they're committed, they don't do commitment. So how do you get senior leaders on board so that they're up to speed on what's going on in mentoring and that they're not only committed by what they say, but by what they do, and it affects the bottom line as well. Another thing that happens is that people have different assumptions about what mentoring is and different attitudes and perceptions about formal programs. So it's important to address that. I like to say also that fuzzy program goals result in fuzzy program outcomes. So those are a few of the things that I would highlight. I also want to touch for a moment on this whole idea of lack of communication. I've been in many organizations that will bring me in and bring our organization in, and people really don't know about all the mentoring that takes place within the organization, informal, formal mentoring. So communication is going to be very important. And then the final one that I want to highlight is the lack of continuity or commitment of mentoring program leaders. So just as we do leadership development and leadership succession development, we need to think about that in terms of our mentoring programs. So launching a mentoring program without simultaneously creating a mentoring culture is going to affect its long-term sustainability. So I want to suggest an underlying framework here. I like to think about it this way. I like to think about it in terms of creating organizational readiness. There are things that you need to do to create organizational readiness. There are opportunities that you need to provide, opportunities for mentoring, opportunities for engagement, and support. All of those drive sustainability, and it seems that the least thing that gets attention is support. So important to keep that in mind. So as you look at your own program, to address and to think about readiness, opportunity, and support. So we're talking about a mentoring culture. And a mentoring culture is built on this framework of readiness, opportunity, and support, because that's what drives sustainability. So why is a mentoring culture so important? It's important because it embraces all the mentoring that goes on in the organization, whether it's informal mentoring, whether it's formal mentoring. It also strengthens relationships. As you build relationships, mentoring relationships, and people get to know one another and understand one another, it has a ripple effect. So obviously that would add to the vibrancy and productivity of an organization. People feel more connected to each other and to the mission of the organization, and it promotes mentoring excellence as a standard of practice. So I want to take a deeper dive and look at that. So here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at the 8 hallmarks, and underlying that is knowledge of the culture and the infrastructure. So let's take a look for a moment. The culture, it's what goes on in the organization. It's important that mentoring aligns with the culture. We're not going to spend much time on that now. I do also want to talk about the infrastructure, though. It's really important to get the right infrastructure in place. So those are the building blocks that underlie the hallmarks. So let's take a look at the first hallmark, which is alignment. So what we're talking about here are aligning all of these things: people, the values, the vision, understanding, strategy, structure, and communication. So if we take a look at this just for a moment and just spend a moment thinking about these elements, if one of these is out of sync, it affects all of them. So for example, if you have all of these elements, but you're missing something like strategy, people are not going to know what to do. People are going to be disappointed. if you're missing a shared understanding, you can have all these things in place, but people will be doing different things. So you want to make sure that you have all of these pieces firmly in place, because this is what is going to help you be aligned. So alignment is really a power tool. And one of the things that it can do, I've seen this done in actually some of our federal agencies, the attempt to align, harness, and maximize resources without dinging anybody else's effort. So how to bring all of those pieces together? What you can do is to, one, get everyone on the same page. You want to make sure that mentoring is an organizational priority, and you want to find ways to consistently demonstrate that it's a priority. So you want to make sure that there is alignment. There's understanding, there's a strategy, there's a structure, you're communicating it, the right people are on board, it aligns with your values, and you have a vision of where you're going. Let's move now to accountability. So accountability is really important. It's important because it helps you stay the course. This means that you have to clarify your expectations up front. You need to define roles and responsibilities. So it's not just roles and responsibilities for the mentor and the mentee, but everyone else who's involved in the program directly or indirectly. So where does that accountability lie? I'm reminded of Max Dupree, who said, without delineation of responsibility, you can't expect to have accountability. And that's true. So important to think about who are all the people who are defined, who are touched by mentoring. You also are going to want to monitor progress and measure results. And I'm sure that this is a challenge for you. It's a challenge for most organizations, because without that, they drift aimlessly. So it's not just having mentoring meetings and counting the number and not just doing mentoring because it's the right thing to do, but it's really taking it seriously. So let me just move back a minute. What I want to just say is that in terms of accountability, you want to make sure that you're engaged in capacity building evaluation. So you want to get it to the quality of the experience. I think besides the participation, the quality of the experience, you want to look to short-term outcomes. So what kind of cognitive changes are taking place? Affective changes. We see a lot of affective changes as the result of mentoring. What kind of behavior changes? What are people doing differently? And then you want to look at some of the long-term outcomes. Institutional improvement, programmatic improvement, and mentor and mentee growth and development. So those are important outcomes and important things to address when you're looking at the evaluation piece. So I want to emphasize the evaluation piece, and I want to emphasize the definition of roles and responsibility. And of course, one of the things you certainly have to do is to make sure your goals are really clear, because that will help people be accountable. So let's look at communication. Getting buy-in and getting people to take it seriously and getting people on the same page. I want to look at a model with you that would help, I think, clarify what goes on in organizations and what could go on in organization. So we spoke a little bit ago about getting buy-in from upper management, but this also is true from anywhere within your organization. The first thing you want to do is to create awareness. Help people become aware of that mentoring is going on. And then you want to make sure that you create a shared understanding about it. So you add some depth to it. It's just not about knowing that it's there, but it's really understanding what the concept is, understanding what the construct is, understanding what it could do. It's really adding some meat on the bones of mentoring. Then where you want to go is to gain acceptance. So too often we go from awareness to acceptance, and if people are accepting, they're just accepting on the basis of awareness and without that full understanding. So they really don't know what they are accepting. And then we talk about commitment. So how many times have you made somebody aware, oh, we're having a mentoring program, we'd like you to be a mentee, and then you ask for their commitment? We tend to skip over understanding and acceptance. And what you really need to do is to go through those steps before you ask for commitment. And then you can really get people's buy-in. That leads to action and really coherent action and ultimately to integration. So communication at every level is really important. So 3 questions to ask you to think about. Number 1, do you have a shared vocabulary for mentoring in your organization? Is it consistently used? And is it inclusive and sensitive to diversity? So we move on to value and visibility. Emerson said once, what you do shouts so loudly in my ears I can't hear a word of what you're saying. So the idea is it's not just the talk, but it's what you do. So some questions for you to think about. First of all, in what ways is mentoring currently visible and adding value in your organization? We know that nothing diminishes morale and effort more than not having leaders on board. So in what ways are they making it visible? So a challenge for you would be to name 5 actions that you can take right now to raise the current level of mentoring visibility and heighten the value of mentoring in your organization. Let's go to the chat area right now and get some brainstorming around this, and maybe this will help you defining your own 5 specific actions. So what can you do right now to raise the current level of mentoring visibility and heighten the value of mentoring in your organization? So let's go to the chat bar on the right of your screens. So I'm not seeing any responses. Are you seeing any, Kimberly?
I do have one that says communication from senior leaders.
Okay, great.
And also feedback from mentors and mentees.
Okay, feedback from mentors and mentees, which should be an ongoing process. What else?
The communication from senior leaders, those are the 2 that we have so far.
Okay.
And then also get HRBPs to support it as well with the business.
Right. So I want to encourage you to take the time after this webinar to think about and to brainstorm with people in your organizations, looking at the value and visibility where it is right now. What are some of those concrete actions that you can take that are going to raise the current level of mentoring visibility and add value? And one of the things that you can do that would help you generate this is to actually use a brainstorming technique where you have 4 or 5 people sitting around the table, have each person make a list, and then put that list forward. And if you have 5 people, you have 25 suggestions, and maybe some of those are duplicates, but it really is fodder for some good discussion. So let's move on then. And let's talk about demand. Demand is another hallmark. So when you have demand, you have a buzz. People see a different kind of buzz about it, and people see value in it for its development. People want to do mentoring on their own. One of the sure signs that you have demand is when people come to HR or come to their department leader and say, we want to create a mentoring program. We saw the one that they have for high potentials. We want to do one among ourselves. So it's kind of contagious as groups organize, and in a mentoring culture, as we'll talk about shortly, it's really important to support all the mentoring that goes on. And one other indicator here is people ask for deeper and more advanced types of mentoring. So let's say you have a mentoring program that's gone for a year and people want to continue it, or people would like a next level of mentoring. That's one of the signs that you have created demand. So let's now look at multiple mentoring opportunities. And the idea here is, again, it's not just a program, but what we're really talking about here is multiple programs going on at the same time within an organization, and this also speaks to the inclusion and diversity piece of it. So what we really want you to do here is to think in terms of do-it-yourself mentoring groups, peer groups, individual groups that just emerge out of a common interest, one-on-one mentoring. There's also the whole phenomenon of reverse mentoring. There's mosaic mentoring. There's something that people talk a lot about in academia now. It's called cascade mentoring, where the mentor and mentee form an initial mentoring relationship, and then that mentee becomes a mentor, and it cascades down through the organization. So really important to think about that. So let's also address some questions here. You know, what kinds of opportunities are currently available in your organization? What other types of mentoring and mentoring partnerships are possible that fit the culture of your organization? What innovative approaches have you tried lately? And that question sort of brings people up short, because when you add the word innovative, it really stretches you to think about what the possibilities are. So you want to have contiguous programs, you want to encourage innovation, and you want to support all of that that goes on. So let's move now to the next hallmark, and that's education and training. And I want to spend a little time here talking about the fact that, first of all, targeted training experiences have been shown to be the most effective. When you offer multi-level training for new and somewhat experienced and veteran mentors and mentees, it really is a way of promoting that whole idea of mentoring excellence. So the need for mentoring training is ongoing. Facilitate mentoring roundtables. Now, let me tell you a little bit about that as an education and training opportunities. Roundtables are learning and support sessions that promote active and timely sharing of best mentoring practices among a peer mentoring cohort. So it could be mentors or mentees. And what it does is it encourages benchmarking of progress relative to others in the group. We've been working with an organization right now that we have encouraged them in their pilot every quarter to hold mentoring roundtables, and it has been a wonderful adjunct to training, because people go through their training, then they wonder how they're doing relative to other people. They need best practices, they need things in timed intervals when there is a readiness to learn. So this idea of roundtables where there's sharing of best practices without compromising confidentiality, but this is really about helping mentors and mentees perform at their ultimate best. Another thing that you want to consider is conducting renewal training for experienced and veteran mentors. So it may be that someone has participated in training 3 years ago. Important to keep it fresh, and important to also give people who are veteran mentors and experienced mentors an opportunity through training to reflect on their own experience, to sit at the feet of their own experience and to learn for it. So the advantage of this is that renewal training eliminates stagnation in the mentor role, and it helps elevate mentoring skills. You also want to prepare mentors to transition to their role as a mentee. We see more and more mentors now becoming mentees, and we know the transitions are particularly rich teachable moments. We can't assume that because someone was a good mentor, that they're going to be a good mentee, that they're going to get the most out of it. And it is challenging when experienced mentors find themselves sitting in the mentee seat and trying to figure out how to function in that role. So also, you want to develop your organization's internal mentoring expertise. So that means training and empowering a cadre of mentoring coaches to support mentors and mentees at all levels so they can become successful at mentoring. So the idea of mentoring coaches has really taken hold in organizations, a go-to person that's there to support the mentor separately and the mentee separately, or mentor and mentee together, to help them be successful. And it's important to make sure that these key people, these coaches, receive state-of-the-art education and training in mentoring. And then finally, when we think about education and training, it's important to include mentoring training as a key element in your leadership development program, because after all, mentoring is a leadership competency. And every leader should know how to be a mentor, how to find a mentor, how to create good mentoring relationships, and how to best support mentoring. So it's a key element. And if you have your individual development plan, one of the pieces on your leader's plan should really be about mentoring. So we've looked at 7 hallmarks. Let's turn now to the final hallmark, and that's the hallmark of safety nets, because we want to make sure that everyone is successful. And we want to set processes in place for if and when stumbling blocks and roadblocks occur. So a little model here, you want to be proactive if a stumbling block occurs, and you also want to be able to be reactive. And we also know there are organizational roadblocks that come up. So again, when you're planning your program, what could possibly get in the way? An example might be a restructuring. Reactive, again, if something happens that you're not anticipating. So set processes in place for if and when a stumbling block or a roadblock occurs. Analyze the organizational roadblocks that might get in the way. Build in a process roadmap for addressing them. So that means really taking the time to walk through the process that you have in your organization, the structure, the framework, and see where a participant might come up against a stumbling block. It also means to build in a process roadmap for addressing them. And so if you look down your organizational, look into the future, what things are going to be happening in your organization, in your institution, that might affect the timing, the rollout, the implementation, important. So We talk a good game when we talk about safety nets, but rarely do people take the time to think about proactively what might happen. And so, important to think about things like confidentiality, time, also that whole idea of leadership succession. So 3 questions for you to think about. When was the last time you did a walkthrough of the process and identified stumbling blocks for mentees? So we've done this many times with organizations. In other words, right from the very beginning, from the application or the assigning of a mentor to a mentee, how do they connect? What are those milestones along the way? What are those stumbling blocks? What are those critical times when mentors and mentees need the most support? So think back, if you have a history of mentoring and a mentoring program, you should be keeping track of when people ask questions. When in the mentoring cycle year do people ask questions? When do they need the most support? Because that will also give you some indicators of when and how to time the training. And how are you protecting the confidentiality of your mentoring peers? That's a big issue, this whole piece about confidentiality. So organizations are big, but they're also small, and it's important to be able to make sure that confidentiality is honored in a mentoring relationship. So let's put all of this together. We've looked at the definition. We've looked at the fact that you need to have some building blocks in place, and we've taken a deeper dive in the 8 hallmarks. So we're going to go back to our model of readiness, opportunity, and support. So when we think about readiness, you need to make sure the business case, in quotes, is crystal clear, that you have everyone on the same page, that you've defined your goals and success factors up front, and that relates to that accountability piece. You want to articulate roles and responsibilities. Again, it's not the real estate, the realtor's motto of location, location, but it's the mentoring model of communicate, communicate, communicate. You want to make sure you provide education, training, and research would be good too. And you want to make sure the leaders are on board with the most current information. Next, we want to talk about opportunity. Create opportunities to promote formal and informal mentoring. And what I should have really said before is that informal mentoring doesn't get the time that it deserves or the attention. So the idea that you educate people, you bring people on board so that they have the tools, they have the training, that they can be good at informal mentoring, that they can practice mentoring excellence, whether it's formal or informal mentoring. Key is offering a continuum of mentoring education and training opportunities. I used the word innovate before. Think outside the box. Create your own. We know as educators it's important to plan with rather than for. So talk to your end user. Talk to your target audience and find out what they need and make sure that what's in your head is also something that they're going to need and want. And demonstrate consistently how mentoring is enriching the culture. And now we move to support. You want to provide support not just for your mentors, but for your mentees as well. Stay on track by monitoring progress and measuring results and broadcasting that because it will become a benchmark. You want to recognize, reward, and celebrate mentoring. And again, I say it's January is National Mentoring Month, comes around every year. And so look for ways to create meaningful celebration and sharing of best practices. And strengthen your infrastructure. Consistently work at that. So here are 3 questions to reflect on in the 30 minutes following this presentation, or as soon as you can. What are you doing to promote mentoring excellence in your personal practice and in your organization? What standards do you consistently set personally and in your organization? And what steps do you need to take right now to create a mentoring culture in your organization? So we have talked about, again, the definition and how it really aligns with what we know about how adults learn best. We've talked about the shifting paradigm, the idea of mentoring excellence, the need to build a mentoring culture, to put the basic building blocks in place. We've talked about the undergirding framework for it of readiness, opportunity, and support. And we've taken an in-depth look at each of the hallmarks and then come back to look at readiness, opportunity, and support in terms of things that you need to do. So the job of creating a mentoring culture takes thought and it takes time. So I hope that you will accept the 30-30 challenge. So I hope that you feel your time was well spent, that you've learned what it takes to create a mentoring culture in your organization. I hope that awareness of the 8 hallmarks has widened your perspective, perhaps suggested some alternatives, and sparked some conversations you want to have with your colleagues. And we have to remember that we must prepare ourselves to meet the challenge so that our efforts can have a profound, deep, and enduring impact. And as Donna Markova said, and that which comes to us as blossom goes on as fruit. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kimberly to field the questions.
Hi, everyone. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box and I can relay them to Lois. We have about 20 minutes open for Q&A regarding this topic today. Okay, so we have a quick question from Melinda. Can we get copies of the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. We can make those available. I believe Paulina from Alumni Relations has an area where we can upload them on the website.
Yes, and actually I'll be sending a message afterwards to just follow up with some of the information, including some of the upcoming webinars and, of course, the slides from this presentation.
Great. Okay, we have a thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zachary, for the great presentation today. You have mentioned multiple mentoring programs within an org. This is from Echo U. I'm wondering if there's a question coming after. How large of a group should we work with, from Lois Peretti?
In terms of how large of a group, in terms of a pilot, in terms of, we need a little clarification.
Okay. They can hear you, so when it comes back in, I'll follow up. In the meantime, we had another question come in from Shrivi. When there's a lot of work, pressure, and stress, how do we ensure there's time for mentoring?
I would say you need to make it a priority. You need to create that expectation and actually have some kind of a document that talks about it as a way of, we talk about student support. Create that as an expectation. One of the things that you can do is go through a training, set up a training so that people understand the phases of a mentoring relationship and they understand that not only do you have to build the relationship, but you have to engage in conversation that will allow you to establish agreements so that between the mentor and the mentee, they actually have this conversation. The mentee may be saying, I just don't have the time. Well, they really can't have the time. Can't afford not to have that time because it's a way of supporting them, supporting their learning, supporting their student success. So to have that conversation and to find out a time that would work for them, and where it would be quality time. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. It has to be consistent time. And what's important is to have a regularly scheduled meeting date always on the calendar for mentoring.
Great, thank you so much. So the follow-up question for that one, when they ask how large of a group should they work with, they're asking if it's a pilot as well as a follow-up, and does the size of the group impact the effectiveness?
I would say this. A pilot you want to start small with. We're working with 2 groups right now that have 15 people in them, 15 mentors and 15 mentees. Working with another one that has 20. It's got to be a manageable size, and you want to learn from that. So what's important also is to make sure that you have the person power in place to support that. So it's not just saying, okay, we have a mentoring program, sign up, but people know where they can go to get help, where they can get information. So do what's manageable for you as a pilot, because what you want to do in a pilot is you want to pick the most successful, the people who you think will be the most successful as a mentor, as mentee, and as mentee candidates.
Great. I really appreciate that question as well, since we're launching our mentoring program here and we're doing it with 20 matches. So that was great feedback for Lois and for me. So another question that we have that came in, how does one measure mentoring success?
Carefully. Okay. You know, it's interesting. People design a program. We go about, we get so excited and so passionate about the program. And we roll it out and we think, okay, once it gets out, we're going to start measuring. And it's important while you're designing it to really, first of all, you're going to articulate what your goals are. What are the outcomes that you want to have? And I think right from the get-go to identify how are you going, what is it you want to measure? How are you going to measure it? Who's going to be responsible for that? And to identify that right from the beginning. And also think about using the baseline information that you already have available. So we collect in organizations a lot of baseline information. And so it would be interesting and easy to use some of that to begin to measure that success. I also encourage people to do not just quantitative but quantitative analysis. So one of the things that we do with groups, and we also encourage groups to do, is to do a quarterly or 3-time-a-year check-in with mentors and mentees, and to find out qualitatively what's going on, and to find out what, by having those kind of touch-base conversations, or what we call TBIs, touch-base interviews, you can find out where people's heads are at a particular time, and it gives you longitudinal data to see at what point changes took place. And it also allows you to look at across all of your mentors, across all of your mentees, and also gives you a chance to compare your mentors and your mentees to see if they're really on the same page. So these are confidential, what we call touch-base interviews. And they're qualitative questions that are designed to get at, are people growing in the role? What kinds of support do people need? What are their best practices? What are their challenges? So the answer, how do you measure success? I think quantitatively, qualitatively, and to also look at it from benchmarking it against comparative groups and getting input from different levels of the organization.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So the questions are starting to really pour in here. On the top of your head, could you think of any examples of successful mentoring programs that someone will be able to look into? Or even if you get back to us via email, that could work as well.
No. I mean, I know that there are companies that have many companies that have successful mentoring programs. I know that right now Gore has a fabulous mentoring program that they're working on. There are many nonprofits that have successful mentoring programs. Certainly IBM. I mean, many of the Deloitte and Touche. There are a lot of organizations that have what they would call successful mentoring programs. I wouldn't, recommend one over the other, but I would say that there are many that have them, and there are many that have them that could do better. And I think that do better notion is no matter how good your mentoring program is, you can always do better.
Okay, great. I have another question here that's really good. Is there any preference or thoughts about assigning mentors versus having the mentee pick a mentor?
Okay, so there's a lot of thought about that. So many times there's a group of people who have, let's say they have identified high potential people, and they actually have an application process where mentees might articulate what is it that they're looking for, and also mentors. What is it that they can offer people? So there may be that kind of match. One of the things that we see a lot of is organizations that would have a pool of mentors and a pool of mentees. And for their mentees, they would offer 2 or 3 choices, or ask their mentees to offer 2 or 3 choices, and then be able to make the best match for them. What's important is if a group is making the matching, to be able to go to the mentor and to be able to say, we have 5 people here who have asked for you as a mentor. We don't want to overburden you. Here are some backgrounds. I'm not going to, here are some backgrounds. Which one do you think you might be able to bring the most to in terms of that relationship? Mentees like to have a sense of choice and not to be voluntold who their mentors are. But a lot of it also, Kimberly, depends on the culture of the organization.
Okay.
So it may be an organization where people want to be matched, but you want to make sure that the match is okay for the mentor and the mentee.
Okay, great.
So you're looking for learning fit, okay? And I think the other piece that would align with that, or the other comment that I could make, is don't do it on basis of convenience. Don't do it on, and be very careful not to match people who are in the same chain of command. So that's an important piece as well. You don't want to be assigned as a mentor your boss, because then you lose the spontaneity, the vulnerability, the realness that could happen in that mentoring relationship.
Okay, perfect. I have another question here from the perspective of a mentee. As a mentee, how would you suggest impressing upon an organization the importance of mentoring when it isn't a priority?
Okay, so you're a mentee and you want to make the business case for it. And I would say one of the things you want to talk about is what you've learned, how you can see that it would impact the organization in a positive way. You might get together a group of other people who feel the same way and either put together a proposal for one, but you want to, again, make the business case. Talk about the qualitative differences. Also, I would just get online and actually I think there's an infographic that if you email me, and I'll give you my email address here, I can send you the infographic in terms of the statistics and data that support mentoring in an organization. But it's really about your growth and your development and how that redounds to the benefit of the organization as well.
Okay, great. So I have two questions here that I had to ask for follow-up. But one person wrote, I'm wondering if one has to compete with another program. If so, how to make one specific to employees?
So if I'm not sure that I'm getting the question. Are you saying that there are multiple mentoring programs?
I'm wondering, I asked for follow-up. So this person said, yeah, she said yes. If there's multiple mentoring programs, how do they make one specific and unique?
Okay, you want them to be specific and unique. You want them to be targeted to the audience. In a mentoring culture, you might have, let me just point out an example. A university college setting where you might have one in a mentoring program in a sports program. You might have one in academic readiness. You might have a faculty program. You make it targeted to specific people, and you can make it unique because, again, you want to pay attention to the alignment within that department. And that's fine. What you do also want to have, though, is a consistent definition of what mentoring is in that institution. So you don't want mentoring to be coaching or training when they use the word mentoring in one department. You want it aligned throughout. So I would say, yes, target it for specific populations.
Okay, perfect. And the last question here, someone wrote in, how do you find out what is going on? Roundtable conversations, questionnaire. So I'm assuming they're talking about what's going on possibly in the mentoring relationship.
Okay, so you want to facilitate this and say, it might be something like, it's February, and by now I'm imagining most of you have started conversations with your mentees about goal setting. What are some of the strategies that you've used? And to ask that kind of a question, let people talk. What's been most successful? Another thing might be, let's get a sense here of what some of the mentoring goals are that you're working on in your relationship. So you generate a whole list that would give other people ideas. But it really, you'll also get a sense of where people are in the relationship. So you may have 10 mentoring pairs that have met 3 times and 1 or 2 that have only met once. So, and there may be other things that are going on in that person's life or in that department or in that part of the organization. But I think you ask questions that generate a discussion without compromising confidentiality. So it might be, what are one of the biggest challenges you've faced in the last month as a mentor? Or what's one of the biggest challenges you're facing right now as a mentee? So being prepared and asking the right kind of questions ahead of time is really important.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one more. And this one's something that's constantly being asked. What is the difference between coaching and mentoring?
You are absolutely right. It is something, it's probably, if I could make a list of top 10 questions, it's number 1.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so it looks like this. All mentors are coaches, but not all coaches are mentors. So let me kind of explain that. Mentoring focuses on development and the future. But in doing mentoring, you need to be able to harness the skill of coaching. Coaching boosts performance in the present. And in order to get to the future, you have to sometimes take care of business that's going on right now. But you don't want to get involved in fixing a problem at work. That's not what mentoring is about. Mentoring is about development. It's moving towards a possible future, a vision of yourself in the future. It's developing the competence, the confidence, and the comfort and to be able to move towards where you want to be in the future. So in other words, they're kindred spirits. They use many of the same techniques, but mentoring is not necessarily a skill set of a coach. but coaching is one of the many skill sets of a mentor.
Okay, great. I think that was a great way to wrap up our conversation today.
Okay, and I want to say to those of you who have questions in the aftermath or want to be in contact, my contact information is on the screen, and we'll follow up, Paulina and I, and I'll make the slides available as well.
Great,
So
thank you. And Paulina,
yeah.
do we have any additional information?
No, so I'll definitely be sending, a message with Lois's slides as well as her contact information so that you may contact her.
Great, so thank you so much, and stay tuned for our next webinar coming soon. Have a great day, everyone.
And happy Mentoring Month.
Yes.